Okay, well, thanks for being here. I'm Sarah Barnaby.
I'm Amy Matthews, and together we're the co-founders and co-directors of Babies Project, which is an educational nonprofit in New York City. Our space when we had it was in New York City. And we are infant developmental movement educators and body-mind centering teachers certified by the School for Body-Mind Centering. And if you have more questions about that, we'll have a lot of time for questions, so you can ask us more about that later if you want to.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to do this. This is the first of 4 sessions we're going to do over the month of May. Each of these will be on Thursdays at 1, our time, and preceded by a blog post on Tuesday. And Amy and I are handing off, taking the lead in writing the blog posts. And then also we're going to see how this works. But our idea is that because Amy wrote the first blog post, I will play more of a kind of moderator, interviewer sort of role, just also so we can be clear with each other of who's talking. And then, so Amy will give a little intro about what the topic is for today, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay. And we're hoping to leave lots of time for discussion and questions. We're assuming that, well, we'll see, but we're assuming some of you or all of you have at least looked at the documents, have an idea what we're talking about. So to start, we thought maybe you could write in a comment where you're located right now in the world. And maybe you could say something about, I mean, we kind of have done this with you, but because we more or less, one of us at least knows all of you, but maybe some connection to, is it BMC? Is it IDME? Did you bring a baby to Babies Project? Oh, you're just over in Hoboken. Okay.
Yeah.
In your car.
In my car. That's right.
And does everyone know, has everyone familiar with Zoom? You know, you have the speaker view and the gallery view up in the upper right corner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ah, Nova Scotia, great. Thanks. Okay. Rosanna.
Hello.
Welcome. Glad you figured it out and could join us.
Yes, great.
So we're just starting, and people are writing in comments where they're located and how they found their way to knowing us or finding out about it. I'm going to turn it over to Amy in a moment to talk about our guiding principles. Wanted to say in general that the way the handout is laid out with a little short principles at the top, and then it follows with some practical suggestions, what we hope are practical suggestions, is also in general how we work with people. Like, we always send out our principles to parents and other caregivers who are bringing their babies for the first time. Hi, Elena. And because we found it helpful for people to have an idea of where we're coming from before we start making suggestions. So it's really a way of saying, here's where we're coming from. We don't necessarily expect everyone to be totally on board, but we want them to have an idea of kind of the context and the framing and the philosophy. And now Amy's going to give a little overview of the topic for this week. She wrote the blog post and she has a lot to say about it.
Great. Is there anybody who did not have a chance to read the blog post or has not looked at the handout that we've made available with the images on it? Did anybody get to see it? Okay.
I mean, I didn't see the handout, but I just read the short descriptions on the website, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, part of what we're building our whole campaign this month around is this handout that we've created that came out of another project we were doing, but we wanted a long time to distill down what we do into some way that we can try to make the work as accessible as possible, and with these images, and really like how much can we distill it down without oversimplifying. So when you get to some place where you can download them, we've got them in different languages now, and we think it's super useful. So,
Probably.
but our guiding principles, so we've played with how to describe this, and those of you who have done some BMC training might find these really familiar, because we have taken these ideas from body mind centering. We use slightly different words, but the words we're using are safety, orientation, comfort, bonding, and curiosity. And this is a kind of set of states that's really similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but not exactly the same. Another model, you know, any of these models are trying to get at a particular thing. And what we use this to get at, and I think for both of us, but for me in particular, it's not only for working with babies, but it's really influenced my working with adults and teaching teachers, and just any kind of exploration. I think this is a great foundation, because we look at it as a foundation for how we get ready to learn and to learn to learn. So the idea is that is that safety comes first. Do we feel safe? Do we subjectively know we will survive what's about to happen? And it's not about the outside experience. It's not something I can tell you. I can't say you're safe, you're going to be fine. Because a number of things that affect someone's sense of safety really are sometimes outside of my knowledge or my experience or what I can comprehend. And for a baby, they're having a kind of experience that is so new. It might be hard for us to remember how new it is, maybe not. But also for an adult, for any of us learning something new, it can be really disorienting, which is kind of the next step we go to. So safety, how can we help someone feel safe? How can we create the circumstances for them to feel safe? How can we as teachers or caregivers or facilitators invite or be curious or ask about what safety means? And, you know, for an adult, that's a different question than with a baby. But it also involves really respecting their experience and understanding that their subjective take on the experience, whether or not we think it's scary, if they're scared, then the next steps become more difficult. So safety we start with, and orientation. And the word orientation we've been bringing in for a long time, but in some of Sarah's work, we've found the word orientation really ends up being part of what's used in the trauma studies to say, like, what do you do with someone when they're traumatized? We help them get oriented, one of the ways. So we look at that with the babies too. If a baby's gotten startled, the baby is afraid, how can we help them to know where they are? So orient in space. How can they know where down is? How can they know where the floor is? How can they orient in time? How can they process what just happened? And how can they anticipate or plan, or, you know, depending on the baby or the adult's age, what planning for the future looks like, but orienting to what's coming. All of that is part of orienting. So safety and orientation then become a foundation for comfort, and this comfort that allows for feeling yourself, which is part of being oriented. Like, these all overlap, of course, as so many things do. They overlap and intersect, and they're really interdependent. So we look at them progressively, but we also look at them simultaneously as coexisting. So can someone be comfortable can a baby be comfortable? What does comfort look like? There's a question there that intersects with what's familiar and what's comfortable. So then if there's safety, if there's orientation, and if there's comfort, then bonding can happen in this model. And by bonding, we mean a kind of relatedness that we could use a lot of different words, but the word we use in BMC and that we've brought into our work is bonding, which is for an infant in particular about first being able to receive support. So being safe enough and comfortable enough, safe enough, comfortable, oriented enough and comfortable enough to receive support, to not be defending. And then in that receiving of support, to then be able to give support. But it starts from a receiving place. So if a baby isn't safe, oriented, and comfortable enough to actually receive support, we have to back up. And it doesn't matter in that moment how supportive we are being. If they're not in a place where they can receive it, then we need to shift what we're doing. So from safety, orientation, comfort, and bonding, then we get to curiosity. And from in curiosity, then we're looking at this exploration, this like, can I be curious about what's going to happen next? Can I be curious about what this thing is right in front of me? Can I be curious about the people around me? And this curiosity is, we're trying to get at with this word something that's different than problem solving. Like, I don't feel safe, so I need to get safe. Or I'm hungry, so I need to get food. Or I'm afraid, so I need to get out of the situation where I'm afraid. That kind of tactical activity or problem solving is also a really great skill to have. But we're talking about the curiosity that comes when safety, orientation, comfort, bonding are there. Then this capacity to explore and inquire and fall down and get up and make a mistake and learn, not necessarily in a targeted way or a goal-oriented way, though it can be very focused, right, this curiosity. But the idea is that curiosity might actually bring us into a new space where I don't feel quite safe. And then I can start the whole thing over again and go, wow, I got myself into a position or a place or my world got bigger, like a baby will when they learn to roll, for example, or when they get themselves to sitting, or when they get themselves, like all of a sudden the world is bigger. It happens to us as adults all the time too. We go somewhere else and like, whoa. And then it can be scary or it can be unfamiliar. And then we have these resources for looking at, for going back to safety and orientation, orientation to lead to safety, so that we can find our way back through comfort into bonding, into curiosity. So we're looking for how we're looking with babies for how to support those really early experiences, which is where the rest of the handout comes from, like really concrete. This is what we think maybe will create an experience of safety. This is what we think can help orient a baby, and then help them receive support. And then we don't have to teach a baby. Then their curiosity will lead them to rolling, will lead them to moving. So adopting these principles, and really the way that Sarah and I feel like we've really taken them on as our founding idea, also brings us quite explicitly to the idea that babies don't need to be taught. If these circumstances are there, they don't need to be taught to move. There are some things in the world that we don't learn without being taught. It's not easy to learn to read without being taught. There's some language things that we need to be taught, manners, mores. Some of these things that we need to be functioning adults are things that have to be taught, but movement is not actually one of the things that an infant needs to be taught. It will happen. If they're not afraid, if they're not inhibited, they'll figure out how to walk. They don't even have to have walking modeled. They don't need to be taught. They don't need it modeled. Walking is what will happen when there's space available to move, when there's things to climb on, when they're safe and oriented and bonded and comfortable. So I'm going to pause there and see what we want to talk about. We're going to hand it back to Sarah to see if there's anything you want to add.
Well, I'm weighing up things I want to add now or wait till we get into it. I think, well, a couple of things I want to pull out that you talked about. One is about trauma and resilience. One of the things I love about this framing and the way we take it on is that we can always go back to safety, or, well, hopefully we can always go back to safety, and that if we value safety as a base, safety and orientation, and or anything that's below, if we're looking at it as kind of a stepwise, that when there's a question about what's going on or there's a challenge or a problem, we can go back to starting with, is there a question about safety or orientation? Then let's go back to that. And to see that as not a failure or a problem, that whoever we're working with, or if it's ourselves, that there's a lack of safety, to respect that, to acknowledge that that's where we are, and to move from there. And I love the fact that all of this is in its pretty explicitly laid out. As Amy said, not necessarily using exactly the same words in the body mind centering and the infant developmental work. And it's showing up so much now in all of the trauma work and how that's become very big. And a lot of this that was with Bonnie and who she was working with was before polyvagal theory, for example, for those of you who know polyvagal theory. And it aligns also with things like attachment theory. So while we're coming from a body mind centering frame, it's very much in line with attachment theory, polyvagal theory, general, how to, all the books that are kinds of titles like how do you trauma proof your child, not child proof, but trauma proof your child. A lot of these principles are you find them there. Yeah, that's all I have to say for now. So I put a little chat. Does anyone have questions? Does anyone have things they want to share about how this resonates with them or how you've been thinking about it?
Or things you want us to say more about?
And you can write it in a comment, or there's a few of us that you can just take over the speaking.
I can say something about my own experience, but I don't know if that will be an end point, but I resonate with what I've heard. And in terms of, I have been experiencing, even in my late 30s, after I moved to the United States, which was like 4 years ago, and because that was mostly a decision that my husband took, somehow I couldn't feel my floor underneath, because I had to quit my job. I had to be more away than my family than even I was, because this was my second movement to another country. These were like, yeah, now I definitely resonate. And when I look like how I took action when I was a teen, and how much I'm afraid now to do things that maybe naturally came to me once. It's like, it's mind-blowing. And now I'm pregnant, and sometimes it feels like if I was in my 20s, I could just be more of a uh, with more of a self-confident person with my baby than I am now after I've been through the whole trauma or whatever I was experiencing. And that is like, that is a shift that, you know, I don't know if it came with being more aware of what I've been going through, or, you know, just like having the luxury to think of where I am in space and how did I come to this point and why some things unfolded the way that they did unfold. And, you know, a lot of that, because I didn't have that time. I was just action oriented. Like I would give 100% without not so much of thinking. Those were mostly my instinctive decisions that made me my life until the 30th. And now it's like I'm a bit overwhelmed with choices that I must like consciously make with awareness, because the way that I made them doesn't feel like I can't make those decisions the same way that I made, because I don't feel supported that way anymore. My mind doesn't work that way. And it's just that, yeah, it's like a whole new learning cycle for me of feeling safe. And, you know, I'm not working, so I'm not even in the part of so much of the bonding and curiosity part of it. I love New York. I mean, there are a lot of things that are positive in my experience, but you know, something that lacks, there is something that really, I don't feel supported enough, maybe because of the, you know, these concepts. Like, I just don't feel the safety or, you know, to bond over, to take myself out and bond with people, because I even didn't want to do the work that I have been doing before. So that was a major part of my life. And now I don't have that. It's like a lot of lack of things. So yes, I mean, this is my experience. And then I will soon have a child. And that is another kind of safety, and I mean, a different lens of the same topics that I should actually be given, you know, and it was very interesting when you said that, you know, in the movement, as long as the baby feels safe and oriented and comfort enough, they will be curious to move and, you know, experience their movement. And so, you know, and that, you know, that's interesting to me, you know, because I thought that you have to like you have to teach. Of course there are things that you have to teach, like how to hold a spoon or something, but you know,
Right.
it's nice to know these. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have to teach them to put things in their mouth. We don't
Yeah,
have to.
with their hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a spoon, yes, but eating, right? Like eating will happen. So I think that one of the great things about body mind centering is that we always talk about that we can come back to this at any age. So one of the wonderful things is that if we feel like we didn't get to have these experiences before, we can get them now, developmentally. And so that's one thing that comes up for me hearing you. And the other thing, and I'm hoping, Sarah, that you'll talk about toddlers and recklessness and that kind of thing. But just also, I think one of the things that happens is that this kind of perspective goes, it kind of turns on its head the idea that we have to work harder and go faster and get there sooner. And instead, the like more safe we feel, the more time we take, the more value, the more we shift our values to comfort and safety, the more blossoming will happen. Like that won't stop us. It'll actually make more things possible. Yeah. So that's one thing. But Do you know what I'm talking about, Sarah, with the toddlers and the?
Maybe, but I'll say something and you can
Okay.
say that that's not what I meant.
Okay.
But I want to pick up on you were making this gesture,
Yeah.
something like this. And what came up for me in hearing you talk, Eleni, is that what we see a lot with babies, and this is toddlers as well, is that during a developmental progression, there's a way that their world gets bigger. Whether that means that they can move farther away from their caregiver, we'll say, their primary home base attachment, or whether it means that they can understand the world in a new way through their perceptual and brain development and all of that. But there's a way that when the world opens up, it can be scary. And we often, I think what gets talked about in the baby world is things like sleep regressions or fussy periods or things like that. Our interpretation is those are often times when the world has opened up and actually the baby needs more support to feel safe again. So it's kind of like this, and then we need to help them. And it's not a retreat so much as like, here you are, here's your support. Can you use this support to settle into where you are now so that then from this new, bigger place, they can go out again?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And with toddlers, for example, when our space was open, we had a weekly open toddler session, and we set up the room with lots of stuff and climbing things and toys, and the adults, Amy and I, and the caregivers pretty much stay on the edges and don't initiate so much interaction, but let the toddlers lead the way through the room. And what we notice often is that when a toddler is new to the situation, the first time they come to toddlers, they might spend the entire time sitting on their mother's lap, if it's the mom or the dad. And then the next week, they might venture out to a toy that's 2 feet away from, and then bring it back and sit in the lap. And then it goes from there. And we're talking to the parents about, we think it's really important to respect this and for them to decide when they feel safe. And and I think it sometimes gets couched as when their curiosity takes over and they can't stay in the seat anymore. But I think I prefer a way of thinking like it's the safety underneath that's allowing them to venture out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in that, I think there's also that this idea with a lot of that a lot of people, caregivers, come in talking about like, how do we help them be independent? How do we help them be self-sufficient? How do we help them self-soothe and self-regulate? And we're really firmly in the place of that capacity to self-soothe comes from the experience of being soothed. And to self-regulate comes from being regulated. And that little experience that a toddler has of getting to choose when to go out and getting to choose when to go back reinforces that they know how to find safety. And that moment of them getting to decide for themselves, we think helps them learn other ways later about how to feel safe in a new situation. Because they've had that little bit of agency about like, I'm going to go there. And now like this much more of the room is safe to me. Right. And so that self-regulation, independence, self-soothing, all those self things, they don't come from being pushed out of the nest. They come from the experience of interrelatedness and co-relatedness and co-creating. And we think also that really helps them, us, them, us, helps us, grown-up babies, might calibrate how much we can handle. And what I was thinking about, Sarah, and I'll start, and then if I leave something out, because I feel like I've heard you say this more, one of the things that we see happen in toddlers also is that we set up some floor tiles usually with a little gap between them. So there'll be floor tiles, and then there'll be a gap, and then there'll be another stack of floor tiles. So they might have to step over something that's maybe that high, but and maybe that wide. But for toddlers, that can be like, whoa. And the toddlers that we think are most skillful will come up to the edge, and then they like might go away and come back and go away and come back, and then it is a leap for them to do it, and eventually they'll like do it. They'll take the step over the gap, or they don't do it for weeks, and then some other developmental shift happens and they do it. But their ability to decide in that moment to do it is really different than some of the toddlers we see who come in and do things kind of recklessly. And they do it and they just do it and they fall and they do it again. Now, sometimes they love falling. So their point is not to get over the gap. Their point is to fall and have fun. So that's a whole different question. But if they're trying to get over the gap, if they're trying to kind of do this movement puzzle, and they don't know how to calibrate what to do, they don't know how to pause, they don't know how to, if they can't do it, to try something different, there's a kind of recklessness that we see that we don't think is actually very skillful, that often comes from trying things a little bit before they have the curiosity for it, we think. And that actually, if we wait a little bit for them to get curious about it, they'll do it. It doesn't mean they'll succeed. It doesn't mean they'll do it. Like, it doesn't mean they'll do the movement perfectly skillfully, but the learning will be skillful. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Everybody's looking down and nodding. So.
I think the other part of the respecting a baby of any age is sense of safety. I'm going to talk about babies and toddlers. That they're navigating their sense of safety in often what's a very physical way as they're learning to walk, learning to move, is also they're practicing for navigating the world at large and how they're going to navigate questions of safety out in the world. And that's another reason we think it's so important to respect their sense of safety. We don't have to agree with it or understand it, but if we try to override what they're feeling, then we're not giving them the chance to build their own sense of like, what is their gut feel, or what is their sense when they walk into a room. We don't think it's kind of the reckless question that Amy talked about. We don't necessarily think, we think that at least in the US, there can be something in the culture that values or prioritizes someone who walks into a room and is immediately comfortable in the life of the party and just goes in, and it's like, that is not necessarily a really great strategy for staying safe in the world, to not kind of take an assessment. So, and some people will talk about, and like we're often with parents helping them reframe or inviting them to reframe. It's like, well, we wouldn't necessarily call that shy, or we wouldn't say that they're scared necessarily. Like they're sizing up the situation and they're making a decision, and overriding it doesn't get them to safety sooner. Actually backing off and letting them lead the way, we think. And having some faith that they have a reason for how they're behaving, even if we don't understand it, and then being the support and being there for them.
Yeah. And that goes all the way back to the little tiny babies. I mean, we also, one of the things sometimes that happens is a caregiver will come in and say, like, why won't my baby move? My 2-month-old move, or my 3-month-old, not even toddlers yet, but, and that they're lazy, or we don't want them to be lazy, or we don't want them to be spoiled. And I gotta say, we've never met a lazy baby. There's no such thing as a lazy baby. They're babies, I think, who are scared to move, but I don't think they're lazy babies. And I think, it translates out, I think, it makes me question if they're even lazy adults or just adults who are scared to as an adult, when I think I'm being lazy, it's probably more that I'm overwhelmed or scared to put myself out there, scared to take whatever the step is. So I'll do a million other things in my day besides the thing that's most important to me because I don't want to take that step. But it's rarely because I don't care. Yeah, I don't know that
Yes.
I like that, but
Yeah. So whether or not it's true that there's no lazy baby or no lazy adult person, we found it really interesting to take that on. It's like, well, if we can't call them lazy, if we can't interpret this as lazy, then what could it be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to make a comment about that because I have worked for a long time with young children, babies and toddlers in different family resource centers here in Oakland. And I worked one for a longer time, Lotus Bloom. So we used to say, like, we use the expression slow to warm. And because, oh my God, we used to have in a room between 20 and 30 families, which means one child, one mom, so it would be like 60 people maybe, and especially when we were in situations that we were very like full, lots of families, the kids in the beginning, is like you need to take at least like 2 or 3 weeks for them to start to feel comfortable, to move, to explore, to interact in the space. And it's very rare that we had like a child that arrived and immediately just go and run to touch the toys, and start to play right away. This is one in maybe 10 or 15 we could have a child like that. But this, I think it really brings me this, what you guys said, the sense of safety is so important. It's so important for them to start to explore. So as you said, safety orient. This is a new space. We don't know what is that. Let's see. Oh, there is that area. There is the area. And then like bonding, feeling comfortable, and then start to bond with the teachers, for example. I was a teacher. And so how they start to interact with us. And some I had experience with some kids that took them a whole month for them to say hi, and I say good morning and they get back to me. So it's a process. So with some children, we just need to give them time. Yeah, and eventually at some point they are going to say hi and start to allow you to play with them. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
I have a question. How much of the parents' awareness around these topics uh, affect the children's behavior in, you know, in all of this feeling safe? And well, I mean, when they are toddlers mostly, because when our babies, we have a sense, mostly we have a sense like we are there to support them with whatever there is. But once they become to communicate with us, I guess we have these expectations that they are now in like big enough to express their needs or something, and that's not always the case, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So because I can't, like, there's recklessness is really familiar, like doing things without being, not letting things to rise when they are like mature enough, but taking that step. I mean, that is very familiar in my in the environment that I was brought up, and my husband even acts that way. On the other hand, I'm more like in the other side of the spectrum, like let's wait. So it's like there is not so much of a balance, and it's is, I mean, if we had no idea of, if we would just send our kids to to daycare and not wait with them, or do the daycare here in the United States actually give you any idea of how you should approach that process of leaving your child, and how much you should wait, or am I just lucky to have this course right now?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is put it in the context. And so one thing we don't know is that I don't know what daycares do without knowing a particular daycare. Like, I've heard about wonderful daycares that, without necessarily knowing this theory, are doing exactly this. And then there are other daycares where this is not the heart of what they're doing, or they haven't gotten here. And but I also think that and Sarah mentioned culture, like in a particular culture in the United States, in New York, we might call something reckless that maybe in Israel wouldn't be reckless, and so we're talking about these terms in very abstract kinds of ways, but like what safety means, family, like country to country, culture to culture, like educational community to educational community, and family to family gets built in that family, right? So in some families, the babies, like, they get held and they get moved and they get thrown up in the air and it's fine. And then there are other families where we see a baby get kind of held in a way where the baby looks really startled to us. And we're like, this might not be helping the baby feel safe. But another baby might, their mother might have moved while they were in utero. And then, so we really have to look at the whole picture and how the baby responds. And one person's behavior might be reckless, and in another person, it might be curiosity. So it's really hard to say, I think, without context.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is what you were getting at, Eleni, but you said something about how much does it matter, I think, I'm going to respond to what I think maybe you were getting at. One of the reasons that we think it's important to be clear about where we're coming from is because we do think that what our underlying values and the frame that we see the world from can have a potentially huge effect on how we go about caring for a baby or anyone else, and also how we interpret their behavior. And I think we've given a couple of examples, like the question of laziness. What do we need to do? Or if we think that babies need to be taught how to move, then we might do something different than what we're going to suggest, for example, which is lots of helping them get familiar with the floor and gravity and their own body, and setting up the conditions for them to be safe and comfortable and eventually curious. So we think it's huge and part of the reason that we do start from sharing our principles and values is that because of this, because it can make such a difference, and also because certainly in the world that we're living in, I don't know how much dependent on New York, how much dependent on the US, or just our time right now in the world. But parents, from what we can tell, are getting bombarded with lots and lots of information and lots of advice from all kinds of different experts. And an expert is not a, there's lots of experts in the world, experts in lots of different things. And every advice that is given comes out of some perspective, some set of values, some principles, whether or not the person giving the advice is aware of it or not. And so we have chosen to be explicit about where we're coming from, so that people can take it on if they want to and play with it themselves. Like, we're sharing how we have taken it on and what we think comes out of it. But a general principle of safety is something that someone can play with. So it becomes more of we think, a resource than just a set of pick them up this way, put them down that way.
Mm.
Also, that to put out that everyone's coming from a perspective, and as a new parent, do you know what yours is, and can you maybe clarify it, or can we offer something that for you to bump up against, whether or not you agree with it or not, and see what comes out of it for you, which is also a way to help navigate all of the other advice. Like, do I believe this pediatrician, where they're coming from? Where are they coming from? I wonder. Or this book that I'm reading about child development.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the approach always comes from our own, like as parents, our own subjective understanding of what is important, and it's lifestyle or whatever we do. Actually, it's not like I'm doing this for myself and I will do that for my child. It's like it goes together, I guess, hand in hand. What I do think that is important to approach in general in life is something that I would seek, filter all of those expert opinions, which are like endless, and then find myself in a lane where I feel like, yes, this feels like it works, because subjectively, I think that that's important in overall well-being of our whole environment that we live in. So that's, yeah.
And I think what Sarah brought up about the values being really important, not only our subjective experience, as you're saying, but also our values. Like, when I'm thinking about what we set, part of the reason we send our longer page of principles out to everybody ahead of time is to say, like, do you have a chance to read this? Do you know where we're coming from? Because if you're coming in and you really value your baby walking as soon as possible, then we're just not going to have a fruitful conversation. And we're actually not so interested in fighting with people, with parents in that moment about making their value wrong. Because we also think that parents, caregivers, there's so much challenging challenge and shame that around, like, do it right, do it wrong, you're gonna mess up your kid. And like, so many babies succeed so completely. So we want to be, the first thing we want to do is support a caregiver's relationship with an infant. And if the way to support that is to say, like, our conversation's not going to help you because we don't align with your values, we'll say that. Most of the time, people don't find their way to us without some kind of like conversation in a mom's group, where I'm like looking at Elena. Yeah. She just sent another mom to us, and that people hear about what we're doing and how we're doing it. But I don't want to I want to reinforce what Sarah was saying about, we all are coming from a perspective, and we all have values embedded in what we're doing. And the problem with some of the experts is the idea of saying, this is what every baby needs, no matter what, in every situation, rather than saying, if we value this, this is where we would start. And to circle back to the principles, like, we start from these principles because then it might actually look different. We have really practical handling things, but you know, some of the stuff we described doesn't work if you have twins, or it doesn't, you know, so how do we get at the principle, but it doesn't work if your arm is broken, or it doesn't work if you're in a wheelchair, or it doesn't work if, you know, you have to go back to work and you have to send your kids to daycare. Like, that's the reality of the world. And so we want everything to be really also like, there's so many ways to do it right. Yeah. And to help people find that rightness, maybe. Yeah.
And Amy and I also try to say once in a while, try to remember to remind ourselves and others that we ourselves are not parents. So there's a way we think what we're offering is we can be idealistic in a way, or we can have this, like, we love thinking about these things and are trying to refine and articulate, and but we're not in the trenches with the baby all the time. And so that's another reason we like, here's the idea, how might this help you?
Yeah.
How do you want to take it on, and how can we help you take it on?
And then we can be experts in the theory and the ideas, but we're not experts in your baby, whoever's in front of us. Like that person and their baby, they have a relationship that we are not experts in. So where can we kind of participate if they want our help? But the theory is not more important than the relationship.
Yeah.
Well, I think I was thinking about asking you guys about that. I think the conversation came to this point of, you know, because when I was working with all, well, I'm not working so much now because we are in shelter in place for a while, but so I'm not seeing the babies close to me, and just through Zoom now. But I'm wondering, when you guys bring, you know, all these suggestions, you know, in terms of how to touch, how to handle, how to deal with the baby, how much these suggestions are, how they are received by the parents, how much they really use this information or not. Do you have like feedback from them after they have the baby to say like, oh, I did this or that or that? I'm very curious because I know it's a good information, it's fantastic, but always I feel like how much the parent in the real life, in the day by day, use this information, because the day can be crazy for a mom, you know, we know that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Elena can comment on that.
Lena looks like she's busy being a mom.
I totally knew that was going to happen as I'm getting drawing materials for my daughter's art class. Yeah, I'm coming down.
Yeah, so if you're busy, you don't have to say anything.
I will answer for a minute and then I'm going to have to run. I was about to message and say that I have to take off. But, you know, I'm very well intentioned in everything that I try and do daily. And I'm on my second right now. He's 8 months. And I learned some lessons with my first that I'm trying to implement. And, you know, so I try to put him down in the right way. I try to pick him up in the right way. But sometimes Isabel needs help in the moment and he gets dumped on the floor and I run off. And that's just the sad reality of it. Or again, I need to run and get something. And so I scoop him up and, you know, I made this, so Isabel started sitting very early and then she crawled after she walked at 13 months. So with him, I, you know, intentionally didn't want to sit him so that he was on his tummy and he, you know, felt the ground and built up his strength that way. But then sometimes I just need him to be stationary. He started crawling at 6.5 months, and if he's on his belly, he's off doing something, or I'm trying to Zoom with Sarah and he's trying to eat the computer. So sometimes I sit him so that I can have a 3-minute conversation. But I think at least I do things with intention and I'm aware of what I'm doing, whereas previously I wasn't. And so I can make conscious decisions, which aren't, you know, it's not always the decision that I would want to make. But yeah, I guess that's kind of it.
Thank you, Elena.
To run, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, it's after time anyway.
It's life.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I made this comment because in my experience, sometimes I would see moms doing stuff with the baby and I wanna, like in the play group, and I would like to come closer and talk and say like, oh, maybe this is not the best thing for development. And sometimes was, you know, knowing all that stuff that we know, sometimes it's hard, and I would kind of catch myself, oh, maybe I should not say anything, or maybe I should, yeah. So there is always, I felt this feeling of how much I should say, how much I should suggest, and yeah, that's very, very real for me. And, I don't want to bring defensiveness.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're always weighing up. If we say something that makes a parent feel unsafe about their own parenting, then we failed. So, you know, it's never our intention. And sometimes we choose, I mean, sometimes we choose not, I choose not to say something because I think that it would do more, it would have the effect of making the mother feel bad, or the father or the caregiver feel bad about what they're doing. And sometimes we do it by accident anyhow, and the caregiver goes, oh my God, I've been doing this all wrong forever. At which point we have a whole spiel about like babies are amazingly resilient and we all manage, we all work it out. And the most important thing is that there's love there. And the baby will figure it out, like the baby and the caregiver, they'll figure it out. So we do a lot of dancing in this. This is really important. We have these principles we're passionate about, and the reality of the relationship is right there in front of us. And we mess up sometimes, and we take on ourselves the idea of rupture and repair from the attachment theory, that like if we make a mistake, we say we're sorry, we did not mean to do that. You know, do you want to hear it another way? Can we try again? So that same idea, we're not perfect all the time. And it's part of saying like, we don't have kids. I don't have a kid. I'm not in the trenches. I'm not a parent. But here's the idea. And if you want to hear it, I'll say it 1,000,000 times. And if you're done, then you can tell us to stop talking. But, you know, and people come once and they don't come back. And sometimes they write us 3 years later and say, what you said to us, it fixed everything. And then sometimes they come back with a second child a couple years later, and you know, and sometimes they don't come back and we never hear from them again. And sometimes they come back over and over and over again, and it doesn't look like they're taking on what we're proposing. It doesn't look like they're doing what we say, what we ask them to do, but they come back every week. And they're in the room and they're watching what's happening. And so, okay. I mean, we don't understand a baby's experience. We don't understand anybody else's experience, right? I mean, we're all guessing at what each other's thinking and doing. And so, yeah, that's it. Yeah, stop.
Thank you. Thank you.
And sometimes we ask, we have something to say about that. Do you want to hear it? And
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. That's a good strategy.
Yeah.
and if they've heard some of our things, sometimes they're like, all right, give it to me. Tell me. What now?
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. It's a good strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak? We're over time. We're happy to be here for a few more minutes. If any of you need to leave, feel free to leave. But want to give some more space to any other comments, questions bubbling up.
Yes. I was just thinking that we don't often use. Can you hear me now?
Now,
So I was thinking that we don't really use that word confidence. It's not often said in the BMC, or well, that's an impression. And I feel that all we do is building confidence, and that's a physical state. It's not a thought or a concept. It's a reality, how you use your body, the relationship that you have with yourself. So it feels like it's that we are providing or supporting in a way. But
yeah.
it's not often really said, that word. And it's very, well, it's more basic or common, I would say, for the other people, not from BMC, rather than orientation or bonding, safety.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just a thought. I'm not.
Yeah, and I think it relates to the what we were talking before about recklessness. And we actually do some framing around confidence in talking to parents, because we often hear a typical time when we might hear a question of confidence would be in the stage before a baby starts walking. When they're standing, they're pulling up to stand, and they might be walking along, and they might be in that situation for a month or 2 months. And from the outside, or from maybe the parents coming in with a question, they're like, well, it looks like, and maybe they're 13 months, because there's a big expectation, at least in the US, that babies start to walk at 12 months, and there's a problem later that we think is problematic. But so the parent might say they're scared to take a step. And we say, well, we don't know. It might be that walking isn't even on their radar. They're just doing their thing, and they can get wherever they want. So it's not necessarily a question of, we don't think it's necessarily useful to think of it as them being scared. But then we also might say, they're also learning, in all of the up and down and the falling and getting back up. They're building a combination of what we think is functional, is a combination of confidence and caution. And the caution isn't about being afraid, but about having good skills for assessing the situation and deciding, like, how far down is that step, or how far across is that step? Do I feel in my body, as you said, like it's a felt sense that I can do this? And how much do I want to do it? Which might bring me to a different question of taking a bigger risk. So I think sometimes confidence can get, the idea of confidence for some people is more almost recklessness. Like, I can do anything, versus like, I have a sense of myself and what I can do and what maybe I'm not ready to do is also so can we expand or frame what confidence is from a body mind centering perspective?
Agency.
Yeah.
More like try to redefine the terms and talk about agency and choice. But yeah, we're talking about confidence.
Okay, thanks.
Well, if those are all the comments or questions, we can close here. Thank you so much for coming. And we hope you got something out of it. You can, I guess you can use little emojis at the bottom or maybe in the chat to say what you want. Thumbs up or thumbs down, or what's the other one? The clap. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You have agency.
Aw, thanks, everyone.
I have no idea where those are. Can you tell me again?
They're down on the bottom under in
Oh,
reaction.
the reactions. I see.
Yeah.
Yes, there we go.
Um,
Real silent, of course.
Our next blog post is going to be about baby ball. Sarah's going to write it about baby ball and what that means, and that'll be our topic for next week's chat like this. So we'll move from these principles into some really practical things. Baby ball becomes much more practical, while still being theoretical, because Sarah and I are Sarah and I. So we are us. So thanks, everyone. Great to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And those of you who came in as non-video participants, thanks for coming.
Oh, Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
And I just want to say, I see Georgia, who we haven't actually met yet, but congratulations on your new baby. Oh, hi.
Hi, Ari.
Yeah.
There is somebody, Margarita.
Margarita. All right, and we recorded this, so we'll figure out how to make it available to people. So if you want to share it, make it available, we invite you to. And we'd really like to share the handout and the materials as much as possible. So please feel free to share them and distribute them and send them to people. And
Amy, until now, this is the only handout available.
yes,
That's the one. Okay.
that's the one. And we'll soon have, and that's also available in Spanish. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that, do you have it? And then we have a sheet of our principles that's written words. That will be available in Spanish soon.
Okay.
Soon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's already available in Finnish, right?
The handout is.
The handout is, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we got more languages coming.
Oh, how about Portuguese?
Portuguese is coming.
Yes.
It's coming.
Yes.
Yeah. Italian, French, Portuguese. What else?
Swedish.
Swedish.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
German, I think. We hope Slovak. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you next week.
Bye.
See you
All
next
right.
Bye.